think that that will need some consideration when this comes back to committee. And I think that it's worth hearing from some of the stakeholders again to better define things like the long-term care facilities and how we're going to do that, especially if there are those that are on lockdown. What are we going to do in that scenario? So certainly there is more conversation to be held, and I see my time is up. And so, Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, the honourable member will have just a little over 6 minutes the next time this matter is before the House to continue her speech. Statements by members. Déclaration des députés. The honourable member for St. John Ross-Say. The honourable member for St. John Ross-Say.
Madam Speaker, last week I had the privilege of being part of an historic announcement for my riding of St. John Ross-Say. Our government introduced an investment of $56 million for the responsible development of small modular reactor technology, including an investment in Moltex Energy. Our government is committed to net zero emissions by 2050, and this cannot happen without our deep commitment to developing SMR technology across the country. These projects will help us to continue to build a highly skilled workforce at home in New Brunswick, as well as continue to advance new foundational technology. This is an investment not only for our future, but for the future of our kids and grandkids who will ultimately face the consequences of something very real, climate change. I'm proud to be part of a government that recognizes science and invests in it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Dauphin Swan River, Nipawin.
Madam Speaker, mankind has yet to step foot on planet Mars. But thanks to the innovation and work spearheaded by Manitoba's Mark HoC, my constituency is leading the way. Based in the rural community of Minnedosa, Manitoba, Canadian Photonic Labs has been working with NASA on their Mars exploration program. Their high-speed imaging technology has been extensively used for research and development, along with testing the mission's critical events. As a result, the Perseverance rover successfully landed on the Red Planet earlier this year. The successful mission would not have been possible without the technology developed by the Canadian Photonic Labs. Congratulations to Mark HoC and to everyone else who worked tirelessly on this Canadian success story. Your contributions to science and technology are out of this world. Mission accomplished.
The honourable member for Parkdale High Park.
Madam Speaker, the start of spring signals the start of the new year for the Ismaili community. As an Ismaili Canadian serving in the House of Commons, I take great pride in wishing fellow Ismailis across the country and indeed around the world, Navroz Mubarak. With the start of the new year, we obviously reflect on the one that has just passed. COVID-19 has presented incredible challenges, not just for Ismailis, but for all Canadians. But what I've been most impressed by, Madam Speaker, is the resilience of the Jamaat. The Ismaili community has stepped up in its commitment to serving others by providing essential medical services, working on the front lines, and most importantly, looking after Canada's seniors. This has been a shining example of the model of seva, or volunteerism, that His Highness the Aga Khan teaches about. The arrival of a new year always brings a sense of hope and optimism, never more so than this year, as vaccines roll out and we work collectively to build back from COVID-19. To all Ismailis celebrating this week, I wish you Navroz Mubarak. May the new year bring you and your family health, happiness, and prosperity. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria.
Madam Speaker, through all the immense hardships of this year, I've been heartened to see the community of Victoria pulling together to support each other. The opioid crisis and toxic drug supply have been devastating. This is why the North Park community came together with a free drug testing site. The Vancouver Island Drug Checking Project operates anonymous testing for anyone who needs it. Many local businesses have been struggling, but through the Building Back Victoria initiative, Broad Street businesses came together and found a way to thrive by creating a pedestrian zone with outdoor seating where people can gather safely, with hopes it can become a permanent public space. And last week, I am proud to share that the Victoria Admirals U13 team were named champions of the Good Deeds Cup, awarded to the Canadian youth hockey team that does the most to give back to their community. The $100,000 prize will go to the Children's Health Foundation of Vancouver Island. Well done, Admirals. The pandemic isn't over. We still have difficult months ahead, but these community members show us that we can get through this together.
L'honorable député de Pontiac.
The honourable member for Pontiac. Madam Speaker, what an incredible announcement made by our government with Quebec recently. With a remarkable, massive federal and provincial investment of $826 million, we will have the necessary means to achieve our ambitious goal of giving access to high-speed internet to all Quebecers by fall 2022. This operation will enable my region of Outaouais to receive $147.4 million to connect 29,000 homes in Pontiac, the Gatineau Valley, the Gatineau Hills, La Petite Nation, and Gatineau. These investments are unprecedented, and they show that regional internet is a priority for me as an MP for Quebec and Canada, and for all Quebecers and Canadians.
Will receive more funds than any other region in Quebec, connecting more homes and businesses than any other in Quebec. $147 million to connect 29,000 homes by September 2022.
The honourable member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Madam Speaker, I am deeply disturbed by the recent Atlantis Mall shootings that took 8 lives, of which 6 were Asian women. Denying the racial component of this heinous crime undermines the reality of anti-Asian bigotry. With COVID-19 lockdowns, Vancouver alone has seen a 717% increase of anti-Asian hate crimes. Many are unreported for fear of reprisal. But COVID-19 has only exposed the undercurrents of pre-existing prejudice. From the building of the railroad to head taxes, anti-Asian racism has historical roots in Canada. And members of the Chinese and Korean Canadian communities in BC have shared with me their frustrations of perpetrators getting away with racist attacks while they privately deal with anxiety and trauma. I can personally testify that it can take years to undo the feelings of being an outsider and the turmoil caused by racism. So today I stand in solidarity with all who are struggling because of racism, and I'm committed to promoting awareness and helping victims find their justice. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Madawaska.
The honourable member for Madawaska-Restigouche.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to recognize the exceptional work of women's shelters in our riding that offer support and comfort to the people victims of domestic violence. We have amazing teams of advocates here and across Canada who are always available and ready to help these victims. Hats off to l'Escale, Madavik, and Maison Notre-Dame for their amazing contribution to help fight domestic violence. The constant and immediate needs of organizations that provide gender-based services have been demonstrated, especially throughout this pandemic. Our government has invested $100 million across the country to support these services, and my riding of Madawaska-Restigouche alone, that represents over 200, and for my Madawaska-Restigouche alone, I mean, that represents over $252,000. Again, to l'Escale, Medavik, and Maison Notre-Dame, their board of directors, employees, and volunteers, thank you for offering comfort and security to these families in need of help. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
L'honorable député de Acadie-Bathurst.
The honourable member for Acadie-Bathurst.
To celebrate the life and acknowledge the passing of Elder Gilbert Sewell, a highly respected member of Papineau First Nation. Elder Sewell is an excellent example of someone who dedicated their life to the pursuit and sharing of knowledge. Il était un historien, conteur et un guide traditionnel.
He was a historian, storyteller, and what he really loved was to pass on his knowledge to future generations.
From his effort to organize Mi'kmaq cultural events at local school, to having audiences with British royalties, or to being featured on many well-known TV programs. His passion was recognized with several awards, including the New Brunswick Human Rights Award, the Canadian Merit Award, and the Queen's Jubilee Medal. It is no exaggeration to say that Elder Sewell teaching will help ensure that Mi'kmaq traditional knowledge and language will live on for generations to come. To his family and loved one, thank you for sharing this great man with us, and please know our thoughts are with you during this difficult time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Madam Speaker, businesses have been hit hard, in particular fitness and martial arts, including 2 entrepreneurs in Kelowna Lake Country. Michelle, Spinco Indoor Cycling Studios founder, says the pandemic has been very tough on our business, as we've been completely closed for the better part of a year, having taken on a lot of debt we did not anticipate. Our franchisees are local female entrepreneurs, and in some cases are not eligible for support programs. Jordan owns Pacific Top Team Martial Arts Academy. At a great loss, he had to close one of his 4 locations because it was open just prior to the pandemic, making it not applicable for government programs. He describes his situation and many others in his industry as suffering. Health orders are provincial jurisdiction. However, there's been a lack of federal leadership on every aspect of the pandemic for a year now. It was disappointing the Liberals voted down a Conservative motion this week calling on the government to introduce a data-driven COVID reopening plan to gradually, safely, and permanently lift restrictions as other countries have.
The honourable member for York Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Tomorrow evening marks the beginning of Passover. In my riding of York Centre, across Canada and around the world, millions of Jewish families will observe a millennia-old tradition, retelling the story of Exodus at the Seder table. Some of us this year may be celebrating alone, and others will be celebrating with family members on Zoom, together yet apart. Though this year we cannot gather, the story of Passover, of triumph over hardship and liberation from oppression, is a timeless reminder of the lessons that guide us through our challenges today. The spirit of our communities in overcoming the pandemic, in working together to protect our most vulnerable, give us reason to celebrate. It is a community that is strong, resilient, and compassionate, and truly an important part of the rich and diverse tapestry of Canada. As we see vaccinations increasing and anticipation of an end to the pandemic, the arrival of Passover, the holiday of spring, Chag HaAviv, reassures us in the hope that perhaps a timely, modern, but temporary rewording of the Haggadah is appropriate this year. Next year...
The honourable member for Wellington Halton Hill.
Madam Speaker, there's been an alarming rise in discrimination and racism against Canadians of Asian descent. Asians have been attacked in public, yelled at, spit at, and subject to online hate and discrimination just for being Asian. It's clear that despite the tremendous progress we've made as Canadians in recent decades to combat racism and discrimination and to build a society where Canadians of all races, religions, and creeds can live freely, more work needs to be done. I'm proud of being of Asian descent and proud of the contributions our community has made to the building of this country, including the sacrifices made in constructing the railway that laid the basis of this country through Confederation. I'm proud of the contributions we continue to make in law, medicine, science, the arts, business, and politics. Let us all in this House and as Canadians come together to denounce this racism and discrimination and to build a better Canada.
The honourable member for Foothills.
The Agriculture Minister pretends to support farmers, but in reality is negligent when needed most. The minister is complicit in saddling producers with a farm-killing carbon tax, voted against exempting grain drying from the carbon tax, and the Liberals are increasing this tax by 33% next week, which will further devastate Canadian agriculture. When farm groups asked for $2.6 billion in COVID support, she offered just $125 million and told farmers to drain their AgriInvest accounts, money they did not have. This is hard to accept when the Liberals spend $250 million on an Asian infrastructure bank, $225 million on quarantine hotels. At the FPT meeting yesterday, the minister had a chance to support farmers, but once again, she walked away and took $75 million with her. Instead of offering support, the Liberals are hiking carbon taxes and withholding $75 million from Canadian farm families. Conservatives can be counted on to unleash agriculture's true potential and get Canada's economy growing again.
A member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Madam Speaker, we're in a housing crisis in Canada. Many people are finding it very difficult to secure a roof over their heads, and it's often impossible for people who find themselves homeless through mental illness or addiction. I've been very proud of the hard work and collaboration of various groups in my hometown of Penticton to find and build homes for the homeless, as well as housing for low-income families and seniors. And the government of British Columbia has really stepped up in the last 4 years as well. It's been impressive, but it hasn't been perfect. We've hit a bump in the road as projects for people who need wraparound services have caused concern in the community. This is not the time for verbal sparring. It's not the time to say this can't be done, but it is a time to sit down with those who know the needs of the homeless community, to listen to neighborhood concerns, and find the funding and solutions that ensure neighbors feel safe and that no one will be left out on the street. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Shefford.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Madam Speaker, today I would like to tell colleagues about an important campaign. The National Invisible Work Day, created in 2001 by the Women's Association for Education and Social Action, or AFIAS. In 2010, thanks to Bloc Québécois member Nicole Demers, a motion was carried unanimously so that the first Tuesday of April would enable us to reflect on this important issue. But since then, the issue has remained invisible, no pun intended. If there is one thing that the pandemic has reminded us, it is that invisible work has suddenly become very visible. With lockdowns, school and work being done at home, and caring for loved ones, and so on. So I would like to thank the FAS for all their work to raise awareness among the public and decision makers to recognize invisible work, which adds so much to women's cognitive burden. Invisible work is work. Thank you.
The member for Souris Mountain.
Madam Speaker, after over 2 years without a federal budget, Canadians are looking for some security and certainty for the future, especially when it comes to jobs. The Prime Minister seems to think that he and his government somehow know what is best for the people of my home province of Saskatchewan and all Canadians across the country. His Ottawa knows best approach to his economic reset will do absolutely nothing to help hardworking Canadians who just want to be able to pay their bills and put food on the table. Canadians want a hand up, not a handout. Thankfully, there are other options. We Conservatives have put forward Canada's Recovery Plan, which would enact a comprehensive strategy to put Canadians back to work across the country. We will secure jobs, secure accountability, secure mental health, secure the country, and secure our economy. Unlike the Liberals, we will focus on the hardest hit sectors, such as small business, and we will work to ensure that Canada provides the necessary incentives needed to create an environment that encourages investment rather than hinders it, in all industries for all Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Halifax West.
Madam Speaker, today is Purple Day, a day dedicated to increasing awareness about epilepsy, a neurological disorder of the central nervous system, specifically the brain. My friend Cassidy Megan created the idea of Purple Day in 2008, motivated by her own struggles with epilepsy. Since then, Purple Day has continued to grow and helps to dispel myths, reduce stigma, and helps those who live with epilepsy know they are not alone. In 2012, I was delighted when Parliament gave unanimous support to my private member's Bill C-278, an act respecting a day to increase public awareness about epilepsy. The bill became law, making March 26th officially Purple Day in Canada. Now, each year on this date, people on every continent and in over 70 countries wear purple and host events in support of people with epilepsy. This cause is very important to me, and I'm so proud of Cassidy Megan for her ongoing work to grow Purple Day and raise global awareness of epilepsy.
Oral questions, questions orales, l'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Auditor General yesterday clearly said that she was discouraged with regards to the work carried out by the government with regards to our border. That was a year ago now. Canadians are concerned with vaccine supply. We know that India has decided to reduce the exports. The European Union has also tightened access to vaccines, and Canada needs vaccines. So why are there delays?
Minister.
Madame la Présidente, bien sûr. Madam Speaker, of course, we are overjoyed by the fact that we have reached our 6 million vaccine total targets for the first quarter, and we expect 3 million more doses next week. Yes, there was a few delays with one provider because of issues with that company and quality control, but Madam Speaker, we are determined to continue our momentum forward with regards to vaccine import and supply for all Canadians. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Madam Speaker, we have to be honest but also coherent. The government is saying one thing and then it says something completely different. Tuesday at the Government Operations Committee, the Minister of Supply said, "We do not anticipate any interruption in deliveries from Europe." But yesterday, the very same minister issued a statement saying Moderna's vaccines will not be shipped as planned in the next week. Well, who to believe? The Wednesday minister or the Thursday minister? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, of course. Yesterday, the minister published a communiqué to note that she had just received new information from the company in question. This was a quality control issue, just a slight delay of a number of days for 600,000 vaccines for Canada, which means that next week we will receive 3 million vaccine doses for provinces and territories. And this for the momentum that we have clearly managed to establish with regards to delivering vaccines for Canadians. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Well, we got an answer, so we had to believe the Thursday minister, not the Wednesday minister. Anyway, this is the truth of the matter. When there is a vaccine supply issue, there are fewer Canadians that are vaccinated, which means that economic recovery is delayed. And this is why all this is important. The government has not negotiated assurances with suppliers, and that is why Canada is falling behind. Is the government aware that its failures are delaying the end of confinement? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, I can state and reassure my honourable colleague that the government is working hard on the matter, and that's why we have been able to make 2 million doses from AstraZeneca arrive earlier than expected. 1.5 million doses that will arrive from the States next week, thanks to our agreement with the US government. And so, Madam Speaker, we found that we can receive vaccines and import them before when they were expected to arrive, and that's what we'll do.
Wellington Halton Hills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A very simple question for the government. At the same time as the trial of Mr. Kovrig was taking place last Friday in northern China, and at the same time as the trial of Mr. Spaver's trial taking place in northern China, and the same time as the trial of Mr. Kovrig was taking place in Beijing last Monday, the government transferred $40 million to the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, China's attempt to expand its influence throughout the Indo-Pacific region. Why is the government not using every tool at its disposal, including the suspension of this payment, to secure the release of Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Spaver?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, our number one priority at the moment is to secure the release of two Canadians, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, who have been arbitrarily detained on trumped-up charges by the Chinese government, and we will spare no effort to get their safe return home. And we will continue to point out that China is practicing an unacceptable diplomacy by engaging in arbitrary detention.
The Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Madam Speaker, the government says it likes to work multilaterally, but often doesn't when given the chance. In 2015, President Obama and Vice President Biden asked the government not to join the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And now, several years later, it's clear President Biden was right about China's threats in Indo-Pacific. And now Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Spaver are paying the price. Will the government admit it made a mistake, suspend these payments, and withdraw from the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, we do indeed work with our allies when we want to bring up extremely serious problems that are occurring with China, namely the issue of arbitrary detention and the gross violations of human rights that are occurring in Xinjiang to the Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities. And we will work with our partners multilaterally in a coordinated fashion to bring these
extremely important issues to the attention of China, and we will continue to do so until those problems are resolved.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, the Canadian Medical Association revealed that the cost of caring for seniors will reach $490 billion over the next 10 years. Imagine that, Madam Speaker. $490 billion. And that's just to take care of seniors. That doesn't count childcare, serious illness, mental health, and we could go on. That is exactly why, in tabling its budget yesterday, Quebec repeated that it must increase health transfers until Ottawa covers 35% of expenditures. When will the government stop turning a blind eye to the explosion in healthcare needs? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to answer this question. The Prime Minister has taken the time to meet all of his counterparts in the provinces and territories, and they were talking health, amongst other things. We've invested $500 million to help seniors and others access essential services like food delivery. We invested $20 extra million. We invested $350 million in various organisations. I can continue. We will always be here for seniors. The Ombudsman for Joliette. Madam Speaker, I can't believe it. 490 billion is what I said, and the Minister talks of 200 million and 500 million. I'm not reassured whatsoever. Ottawa's cutting healthcare. Everyone is saying it. The Canadian Medical Association, the Conference Board, the Council of the Federation, the Quebec National Assembly, the unions, and even the House of Commons here. And Quebec proved it again in its budget yesterday by investing $10 billion more, whilst the federal share continues to decline. Its share, which was 50%, will fall below 18% within 20 years. And so the Liberals should stop repeating that they are here for Quebec and the provinces. But even the provinces and Quebec are saying the opposite. So when will they do their part? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. I would like to thank my colleague for raising this point. The Honourable Minister. Some technical issues. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. As I mentioned, the Prime Minister is in constant communication with his counterparts in provinces and territories. It's a subject that has been raised. The Prime Minister has committed himself to working on this file. We will continue this work to help all Canadians. We are also enacting measures to disburse OAS, for example, as quickly as possible, and we want to process requests as rapidly as possible. We're talking about several billions of dollars. The Ombudsman for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. The Auditor General of Canada is categorical. The Public Health Agency of Canada has failed in its mandate during the pandemic because of Conservative and Liberal underfunding. This agency underestimated the effects of COVID-19 and was not ready to protect the population. The agency didn't even tell people correctly in both official languages, which once again flouted Francophone rights and Francophone safety. Will the Liberals rectify the problem and make sure that the PHAC and the public service receive all they need to protect us from any further pandemics? The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, and I'll say we have a huge debt of gratitude to the civil servants that have worked so hard throughout the pandemic to protect Canadians. In fact, the Public Health Agency of Canada has expanded by more than 1,000 employees, including 150 new scientists. There's $690.7 million invested in PHAC over 2 years in the fall 2020 economic statement, and I look forward to the member opposite support for passing C-14.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
The Auditor General's report clearly shows that the federal government's pandemic response failed Canadians. Issues were flagged as far back as 1999 and emphasized after the 2003 SARS and 2009 H1N1 outbreaks. Yet the Public Health Agency of Canada failed to address these long-standing problems. It's inconceivable that Canada used risk assessment tools for domestic outbreaks when it was clear at the outset that it was an international one. How can the Liberals justify these kinds of errors, and will the Minister assure Canadians she'll to fix the many problems highlighted by this report, so Canada is never in this position.
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I would agree with the member opposite that we can never be in this position again. And that's indeed why we are committing over $690 million in the fall economic statement. I look forward to her support for the passage of Bill C-14. This is, of course, an investment in the Public Health Agency of Canada to continue their hard work. As I've mentioned, we've added well over 1,000 employees since the beginning of the pandemic, and we will continue to stop at nothing to ensure we have a world-class public health agency.
The honourable member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Madam Speaker, the Minister of National Defence said he can't involve himself in investigations, but Wednesday, the Minister ordered the Chief of Defence Staff to review an investigation that just closed. And the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service told committee that the Minister can absolutely refer investigations to them. Can the Minister appreciate that to many serving women that these different responses can be perceived as hypocritical and inconsistent?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister has asked Lieutenant General Eyre to review how this matter was handled. Let me be clear. The Minister has not directed any investigation. Drawing an elected official, a politician, into the sequence of an investigation would have been wrong and dangerous. Politicizing any investigation threatens a just outcome for those who come forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Madam Speaker, the Minister has said he referred the matter to the Privy Council for investigation. The Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, who would have handled it, said he was never even made aware of allegations against General Vance. The Minister has said the Ombudsman should have investigated. But current Ombudsman Greg Lick told committee yesterday that Kerry Walburn acted exactly the way an Ombudsman should. What lessons has the Minister personally learned from this failure to investigate, and what actions has he taken to ensure the same mistakes don't happen again?
Excellent. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, as we have said, the Minister followed the proper processes. When the former Ombudsman came to the Minister, he brought the matter to the Privy Council office, who reached out to the former Ombudsman the very next day to obtain the information to start an investigation, but that information was not provided. The former National Security Advisor was not part of that process because if the Conservatives had actually read the entire email, he said, this is not necessarily unusual, particularly if PCO senior personnel were not able to obtain information that would have allowed and warranted the pursuit of an investigation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Madam Speaker, the Auditor General says the Liberals failed and put Canadians' well-being, safety, and the economy at risk. They delayed closing the borders when they should have, but were still unprepared. The border is in chaos. Agents can't keep up with changes. The Public Safety Minister still hasn't delivered training that he promised. This week, the Liberals voted against our call for a data-driven plan to get life and paychecks back to normal. How can Canada reopen safely with this ongoing incompetence and uncertainty?
The Honourable Minister.
Oui, merci. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the Auditor General of Canada for her report. Recommendations have been made and concerted efforts will be done. For a follow-up, we will continue to examine recommendations made by the AG's report for our future activities, and I would like to reassure the opposition member that means have been put forward to make sure that CBSA officers have all the information necessary to do their work in a unique context.
I'm for Lakeland.
Well, the U.S.-Canada border moves $2 billion a day in goods, crucial to Canada's economy. For these essential workers, it's a gamble, told they're exempt by public health and overturned by border agents, could even get a $3,000 fine, while the NHL and elites, they get special treatment. An Ontarian who's crossed between auto plants for 20 years says it, quote, depends on which customs agent you ask. I wrote for clear answers, but the public safety and health ministers can't decide who's in charge. The US and the UK have recovery plans. Where's Canada's plan to secure our future?
The Honourable Minister.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would like to thank the member for her important question. As a response to the pandemic, the border closed for discretionary travel, and CBSA increased its support for frontline CBSA officers and allowing them a 24/7 access to support. They also made sure that agents and officers understood what the new rules were, and so they organized information sessions so that all pertinent information be related to officers.
Madam Speaker, in a scathing report yesterday, the Auditor General confirmed what the Parliamentary Budget Officer has been saying all along. The Liberal government has no idea what they're doing when it comes to infrastructure. They let $9 billion lapse, and they don't have basic accountability measures in place. They have no idea if their plan is even working. This is bad news for communities looking forward to new important projects, and the billions in lost projects due to lapsed funds is bad news for workers who have missed out on 3 construction seasons. Why should Canadians believe that this Liberal government will get anything built in the future when they can't do it now?
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, through the Investing in Canada plan, we committed over $180 billion over 12 years for infrastructure that benefits Canadians. From public transit to trading ports, broadband networks to energy systems, community services to natural spaces. 5 years into the plan, we've already invested $81 billion in over 67,000 projects, 90% of them completed or underway. My goal has always been to ensure multiple benefits from every dollar spent. That means jobs, growing the economy, that means more inclusive communities, and that also means climate change. Yes. Certainly hope the party opposite supports that.
Questions et commentaires.
The honourable member for Beauport-Côte-de-Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. No.
Capel, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Actually, the Auditor General found that half of the Liberal government's $188 billion program, over $90 billion, actually comes from the previous Conservative government's plan. They're putting their name on our homework, and they can't even track the money they have spent. 20% of the department's funds isn't even getting out the door. That's $9 billion shuffled around the department. Construction workers were counting on those funds to get their jobs back. Can the minister explain why she allowed $9 billion to get lost in her own department instead of getting shovels in the ground?
Minister for Infrastructure and Communities.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to tell the member opposite that we've actually been able to approve through my department alone close to 2,000 projects over the past year. That's getting shovels in the ground, that's creating jobs, that's getting growth and tackling climate change and building more inclusive communities. Talk to any mayor or city councillor across the country how these projects are improving lives in their community, from Canadian-made electric buses in Brampton to the new McLaughlin Point wastewater treatment plant in Vancouver Island. But I think what Canadians want to know, last election, the party opposite, the Conservative Party, said that they were going to cut infrastructure spending. So will they do that again?
The honourable member for Beauport-Côte-de-Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, today Quebec is lifting restrictions on the performing arts. A vaccine against sadness, theatres can reopen, even in the red zone. The Bloc Québécois is therefore making 6 urgent proposals to ensure predictability and safety for the cultural sector. Ottawa must create a recovery fund to guarantee the viability and sustainability of reopening venues for cultural events. It takes direct financial support to keep performers on our stage. Ottawa needs to help Quebec City compensate for box office losses due to physical distancing. We are reaching out to the minister. What will they do? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the question. We have invested and support to performing arts. It is very important. And in fact, we recently invested more than $181 million new to continuously support performing arts. We know it's important, and we are here to help them. The honourable member for Beauport-Côte-de-Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is not enough. We know that many programs don't work for 40% of artists. Ottawa must support the recovery of the performing arts. At a time when more than 40% of artists are either considering a career change or suffering from major depression, we must compensate lost revenue for festival and events. Federal support programs should be more flexible. We need to encourage audience participation with a tax credit and more health measures. We must encourage participation, and today, theatres are reopening with courage, and the bloc is reaching out once again. What is the Minister going to do? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you. This year, far too many artists and cultural interveners were unable to ply their trade and interact with the public. What we're saying to them is that their government does understand their plight, and we understand that a continuous support is necessary. We have invested $181.5 million. We're working for the interest of various interveners in the cultural sphere of Canada, and we will continue to work with them to stimulate creativity.
Madam Speaker, earlier this week, the Coalition of Hardest Hit announced that 60% of Canada's hardest hit businesses will not make it to the end of the year if they do not receive extended support in the upcoming April federal budget. The Coalition is asking for certainty from the federal government by way of extending both the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy and the Canadian Emergency Rent Subsidy to the end of this calendar year. Will the government commit to these critical measures now, or will these businesses be forced to continue to wait for the clarity and certainty they so badly need?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for this important question. From the outset of this pandemic, we understood that COVID-19 created immense costs for businesses, particularly in some of the sectors that were hardest hit. That's why we moved quickly to establish support programs that would help them keep the doors open and, importantly, help their workers keep food on the table. We recently made an announcement that we were extending some of these emergency support programs, such as the wage subsidy, to the end of June, and we will continue to be there for businesses no matter what it takes, as long as it takes to see them through this pandemic.
Deputy de Beauce.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Madam Speaker, it's all well and good to talk about economic recovery, but to achieve it, we must find a solution to the scarcity of labour in certain regions of the country. How can our entrepreneurs produce, build and innovate if they do not have the necessary workforce to fill their orders? When will the government respond to the many Beauce employers who have been waiting for months to let in the foreign workers they have recruited themselves? What is it doing to encourage the interregional movement of workers in Canada to meet the needs of regions like ours in Beauce? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. The Honourable Minister.
And I appreciate the question. Our government recognizes the integral role foreign workers play in Canada's agriculture and seafood sector. We have streamlined requirements and introduced priority processing for applications and work permits in these sectors. We have also launched a temporary measure that allows workers already in Canada to start a new job while their permit application is being processed. While COVID-19 has presented unique challenges to Canada's job market, we continue to support workers, employers, and our provincial partners to ensure the continued strength of Canada's food sector and supply chain. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Regina, Wisconsin.
Madam Speaker, SaskTel is the largest phone company and internet service provider in the province of Saskatchewan. Last week, the government of Saskatchewan announced that this Crown Corporation will not be using Huawei to develop the province's 5G network. Instead, SaskTel has decided to go with Samsung, a South Korean firm. Madam Speaker, if the provincial government of Saskatchewan can say no to Huawei, then why can't this government?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, our government's going to continue to ensure that Canadian networks are kept safe and secure. We've been saying this for months. Canadians can be ensured that we're not going to compromise on matters of national security, and we're never going to comment on specific companies. An examination of emerging 5G technology and associated security and economic considerations is underway, and we're going to keep relying on our experts. We're going to keep relying on our international considerations with our allies, and we're going to make the best decisions for Canadians in due course. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
I wrote to the Heritage Minister 4 months ago regarding substantiated claims of harassment, verbal abuse, and intolerance levied against the Canadian artistic swimming team's coaching staff by athletes on the team, including an athlete and constituent, Cassie. 4 months and no answer. No coaches have been fired, no apologies to the athletes, but Cassie deserves an answer. The artistic swimming NSO is funded by Sport Canada. So what is the Heritage Minister going to do to fix this awful situation?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the question from my honourable colleague. I have been in touch with athletes, and I have been in touch with officials, and we understand that artistic swimming is taking measures to address these complaints received. We're also working very hard on a safe sport mechanism, an independent safe sport mechanism, which will be implemented in the coming weeks and months. Sport Canada has had the opportunity to speak with Canadian artistic swimming regarding these allegations, and the government is working hard with the sport community to establish these mechanisms as quickly as possible.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Under the Liberal government, Canada is not back. Canada has dropped to 75th place in the list of countries contributing to peacekeeping efforts. Canada's official development assistance is lower than it was under Stephen Harper's Conservatives. And perhaps most shocking of all, today, on the 6th anniversary of the conflict in Yemen, a humanitarian crisis that has been described as the worst place on earth, Canada continues to sell arms to Saudi Arabia. Why is the government continuing to fuel one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for the question. I had the honour to participate in the pledging conference for Yemen a couple of weeks ago, and Canada actually increased our humanitarian assistance. When it comes to official development assistance, we increased by over $1.7 billion in last year alone, and we have been stepping up in the fight when it comes to COVID-19. We are responding to humanitarian needs around the world, including in Yemen, and we will continue to do so. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Madam Speaker, recently media coverage has revealed that several hate-based anti-LGBTQ2IS+ and 45 anti-choice groups have received the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. In 2018, the Prime Minister stated that organizations that had an explicit goal of reversing a woman's right to choose would not qualify for any federal funding. Will the government revoke funding to groups with goals that are harmful to Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for this important question. At the outset of this pandemic, we made a decision to extend supports to ensure that workers remained on payroll, and we did not discriminate as to which kind of an employer that employees worked for. We wanted to ensure that families could continue to keep food on the table. From the very beginning of this pandemic, however, one of the strengths of our response has been our willingness to iterate and consider how they can change programs to ensure that they meet the needs of Canadians. I look forward to continuing to see these programs evolve and would be happy to have a follow-up conversation with the honourable member about this most recent concern.
The honourable member for the Northwest Territories.
Madam Speaker, I was joined by the Minister of Canadian Heritage to meet with the Gwich'in Tribal Council, recipients of the Indigenous Language and Cultures Program, to learn about Indigenous language projects in the Northwest Territories. Thanks to the funding received, the Gwich'in Tribal Council is able to deliver 2,700 hours of language nest programming and 224 hours of language and culture classes in Gwich'in, as well as producing copies of textbooks and teaching guides in Gwich'in and English. Can the Minister of Canadian Heritage tell this House what the government is doing to reclaim, revitalize, maintain, and strengthen Indigenous languages?
Minister.
I would like to begin by thanking the member from the Northwest Territories for his work to support Indigenous languages. Budget 2019 provided $337.5 million or $0.7 million over 5 years and $115.7 million ongoing to support the preservation, promotion, and revitalization of Indigenous languages. When we formed government in 2015, this amount was only $5 million per year for all languages and communities across the country. With this investment through Budget 2019, we were able to fund 372 language activities across communities. We are continuing to work hard and work in partnership. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colonial Lake Country.
Madam Speaker, the Liberals must act on the EU's latest COVID-19 vaccine export measures. Canada is the second largest recipient of EU-produced vaccines, and we could be a target. Since January, when this first emerged, the Liberals didn't get a written exemption for Canada, as nearly 100 other countries have. In his call earlier this week with European Commission President, the Prime Minister failed to receive assurance that Canada is exempt from these measures. Can the Trade Minister guarantee that Canada will not see a reduction in our vaccine imports?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I would just like to point out a couple of facts. Firstly, the 92 countries remaining on the exemption list for these new EU measures are all low-income countries. There is not a single high-income country on that list. And furthermore, as the member should know by now, not a single one of our vaccine shipments from the European Union have been blocked or delayed because of these new EU export measures. Anyone actually familiar with the political situation in Europe at the moment understands that Canada is not the intended target, and neither are either our Moderna or Pfizer vaccines.
The Honourable Member for Belfast is Chemins-Lévis. Madam Speaker, once again, the Liberals are dragging their feet. The Parliamentary Budget Officer's report is damning. The costs and delays of the shipbuilding strategy are skyrocketing, and the Auditor General's report is also sounding the alarm, saying that we need a polar icebreaker now. Countries are rushing to the Arctic for shipping and natural resources. So what are the Liberals waiting for to finally award the contract to build a Canadian polar icebreaker instead of deferring it endlessly? The Honourable Minister.
Madame la Présidente, comme mon...
Madam Speaker, as my honourable colleague knows well, because he was part of the government which limited the national shipbuilding strategy to only 2 shipyards, well, he knows well that since we were elected, we have been working to get ships in the water, to get ships built, to have realistic cost expectations, unlike the former government, and we will continue to do this work. This includes working on a polar icebreaker, and we hope that we will have news shortly.
South Surrey White Rock.
Madam Speaker, on Wednesday, the Liberals voted against a data-driven reopening plan. Let that sink in for a moment. The United Kingdom has a plan. The U.S. has a plan. Liberals claim it's not within their jurisdiction. But I've heard this same government promote tighter restrictions. The supports can only go so far. Every business owner in my riding that I've talked to doesn't want handouts. They want a plan to safely get back to work. What does this Liberal government have against small businesses here and across the country?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And as the member opposite knows, we've worked closely with provinces, territories, indeed local municipalities to ensure that Canadians are safe from contracting and dying of COVID-19. That's the priority, Madam Speaker. We cannot have a healthy, strong economy if people are too sick to go to work. We will be there, as we have, for small business, for communities, for individuals who are struggling with the effects of COVID-19 and the economic impact it's had on them. Madam Speaker, we are all in this together.
The Honourable Member for Essex.
Madam Speaker, the manufacturing sector in Canada and the U.S. has the best COVID protocols in place. They can't afford to interrupt their supply chain and the flow of goods any longer. This government says it wants to build back better. To these business owners and their workers, it seems more like build back never. Enough inaction. When is this government going to give clear and concise direction to CBSA and PHAC before more jobs and contracts are lost due to their inaction? When?
The Honourable Minister.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente. Je veux...
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for the very important question. Yes, it has been challenging to deal with managing the border, but CBSA has set up a 24/7 service to provide the best information possible to frontline workers to make sure that they can make the best possible decisions. When it comes to the essential workers crossing the border, those decisions will be made. And we wanted to make sure that this work continues.
L'honorable député de Rimouski.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Néjet-Témiscouata-Basque. Madam Speaker, the fishing season is compromised in the Magdalen Islands because 40% of the capacity of Cap-aux-Meules Harbour has been cut by the federal government. It's not complicated. No wharf, no crabs. So we asked the Minister and the Member of Parliament for Gaspésie-les-Îles-de-la-Madeleine what she was going to do to solve the problem. Imagine, she blamed Transport Canada. Now, this is a difficult problem. The Liberal ministers will have to stop playing hot potato and find an actual solution. What are they going to do about this port crisis in the Magdalen Islands? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister understands the importance of this issue for residents, and she's spoken with the mayor and residents of the Magdalen Islands, as well as various stakeholders on the ground. The decision to improve the wharf there is a safety issue, and we are actively looking for solutions. We're working closely with our partners on the Magdalen Islands and the fishing industry. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Néjet-Témiscouata-Basque. Madam Speaker, this isn't just a question of safety, it's a question of economic vitality. It's the responsibility of the federal government to ensure that ports and wharves are in good condition. If they haven't assumed their responsibilities and the infrastructure at Cap-aux-Meules is deteriorating, it's their responsibility to find a solution. Staff on site at the port are needed to monitor the situation. Immediate and urgent repairs are required if this is the situation. And if the federal government can't do this, they need to promise the fishermen and businesses that they will not lose a penny because of the Liberal minister's negligence. What will they do? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, I want to reassure my colleague that the fishing season on the islands has not been compromised. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Several committees have had their work stalled by Liberal obstruction tactics. Yesterday, the Procedures and House Affairs Committee was obstructed by Liberals who've been talking since February the 23rd about everything from their favourite Christopher Nolan movie to spoiled yogurt in their office fridges. The Liberals continue to waste time to protect the Prime Minister from having to explain why he shut down Parliament last August when the Wee scandal heat became too much for him. Why is this government wasting time of the committees to protect the Prime Minister? Thank you very much.
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I've said it many times. We believe in the work of committees. They're extremely important work done by all members, but they decide on their own agenda. And my colleague from the Conservative Party knows that. And we're always going to be there to participate and help the work of the committees because, as I said, it's extremely important. And I'd like the Conservatives to stop playing those games.
The Honourable Member for Yorkton, Melville.
Speaker, it's been 5 years since our Conservative government implemented a Canadian Victims' Bill of Rights. For over a year, victims and their families have been calling on Parliament to examine the strengths and shortcomings of the bill, as a 5-year review was written into the legislation. 6 years have passed without action. From expanding assisted death to targeting law-abiding firearms owners, it's clear that the Justice Minister has his own priorities. Why aren't the rights of victims his priority?
L'Honorable Ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the Federal Ombudsman and Victims of Crime for their progress report on the Victims' Bill of Rights. With respect to the question that was presented by the member opposite, disagree with the foundation of it. We are listening to the call to take more action on victims' rights. We are listening and we are ensuring that the upcoming parliamentary review of the Victims' Bill of Rights will take place. We are indeed ensuring that victims' rights are treated with dignity, compassion, and respect. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, it's been 4 months since the Quebec Court of Appeal found consecutive sentencing to be unconstitutional, thereby reducing the sentence of the mass murderer who killed 6 people and attempted to kill 6 others at a Quebec City mosque from 40 years to 25 years. After 4 months, when will this government do the right thing and join Quebec's Attorney General in defending this law so that at least some semblance of justice can be done for the victims?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, this case is obviously a troubling one for all members of this House, including Muslim Canadians such as myself. The finding in the decision with respect to consecutive sentences is a matter that is under review by the Government of Canada and by the Department of Justice. We will make our position known when it is necessary to do so, but we stand by the victims of this heinous tragedy and against all crimes of hate. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough North.
Madam Speaker, members of the Tamil community in Scarborough North have shared that their loved ones were lost, displaced, injured, and went missing during the 26-year Sri Lankan armed conflict. A thorough, independent international investigation that leads to truth, justice, and reconciliation is needed now. The United Nations Human Rights Council plays a key role in preventing future serious violations and in addressing those of the past. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs provide an update on the latest actions taken by Canada to address human rights violations and accountability in Sri Lanka?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank the member of Scarborough North for his important question and advocacy on this matter. Canada, as part of the core group on this resolution, worked alongside members of the Council for the passage of Resolution 46.1 in Geneva this week. This resolution mandates the High Commissioner for Human Rights to collect, consolidate, analyze, and preserve information and evidence. This is an important step towards accountability in Sri Lanka. Canada has and always will stand up for human rights in Sri Lanka and around the world.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Over a year ago, Conservative, Green, and NDP caucuses sent a joint letter to the Immigration Minister calling for a special program to bring persecuted Afghan, Sikh, and Hindu refugees to Canada as soon as possible. Women and children are isolated in their homes out of fear, places of worship have faced terrorist attacks, and innocent men, women, and children have their lives taken away, all for practicing their own faith. Why does the Minister remain silent and show no action, letting these Hindu and Sikh refugees suffer at the hands of ISIS?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, Canada has one of the most robust asylum systems in the world, and we will always uphold human rights. I have worked with my honourable colleague across the way as well as with the community, and we will continue to ensure that Canada is a country where those who are fleeing persecution and violations of human rights will be able to find safe sanctuary.
The Honourable Member for West Nova.
Madam Speaker, on February 23rd, I wrote the Minister of DFO and CRA regarding the new fisheries regulations that go in force on April 1st, a few days away. There are conflicting rules between DFO and CRA that need to be addressed. Many fishing enterprises utilize spousal income splitting to help spread the tax burden, which is allowed under CRA, but now disallowed under the DFO's new owner-operator policy. The situation is another example of how this government is not taking the fishery seriously. Can the Minister, or will the Minister, fix it before the April 1st deadline?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank this member for this important question. It's important to know that we respect the tradition of having families participate in fisheries. These new regulations that are going to be implemented in April 1st mean that captain's log are going to have to record every individual that is active in fishing. It does not have to record individuals, family members that are not active in fishing. And if that member requires any further clarification for anybody else in their riding, I'd be happy to follow up.
The Honourable Member for North Okanagan-Shuswap.
Madam Speaker, the Fisheries Department's reinterpretation of regulations completely blindsided spot prawn harvesters in BC. DFO's reinterpretation would actually force spot prawn harvesters to degrade their catch and accept less money for their work. And what was the minister's response? Well, she deferred the harmful measure for a year, creating even further uncertainty. Whether it's this year or next, this policy is harmful. When will the minister stop slapping harvesters down and reverse DFO's unwarranted policy change?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, our government supports a cautious approach to fisheries management, one that prioritizes the health and conservation of stocks. This season, CNP's enforcement posture towards the practice of tubbing will be one of outreach and education, which means tubbing will occur this season. At the same time, Pacific Region of DFO will engage with industry to discuss and discover possible solutions for the following season and beyond. We will work with stakeholders on this matter, Madam Speaker.
The
Honourable Member for Moncton Riverview Dieppe. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through the history of humanity, technology has never evolved faster than today. It's now more important than ever for us to stay up to date with the most recent developments when it comes to cybersecurity. Even in industries such as agriculture, which are becoming more vulnerable to malware and hackers. Can the Minister of Public Safety inform this House of the recent measures that were set up in order to strengthen protections for Canadian businesses? The Honourable Minister.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente, et merci.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the colleague for this important question. Our government is aware that the threat of cyber attacks is a serious one for businesses in every sector. That's why the Minister announced yesterday that the Community Safety Knowledge Alliance will receive financing of over $500 million for a project that will strengthen cybersecurity in the agriculture sector specifically. This network will allow us to protect ourselves from cyber attacks and particularly in the agricultural sector. The government will continue to make essential investments to protect our infrastructure and improve cybersecurity.
The Honourable Member for Cowichan Langford.
Madam Speaker, last year off the southern Gulf Islands, a large bulk carrier dragged its anchor and drifted over 1,200 meters to hit another vessel. Luckily, no major damage was done this time. Transport Canada's own information reveals there were 102 occurrences of ships dragging anchor in this area over 5 years, raising serious safety and environmental concerns. Residents and local First Nations are calling for an end to anchorages in these waters. Will the Minister commit to working with us to end southern BC anchorages before an environmental disaster occurs?
The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Member for Don Valley East.
Madam Speaker, a few weeks ago I met with Helmets to Hard Hats, an organization that supports the transition of veterans to civilian life. As the Minister is aware, veterans as young as 34 find it hard to transition to civilian life. The organization trains veterans in the building and construction trades. In order to be sustainable, they are requesting a funding of $785,000 per annum for 3 years. Could the Minister of Veterans Affairs please update the House on their request? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from Don Valley East for this very important question. Helmets to Hard Hats is one of the many excellent organizations across Canada that serve veterans and their families. Our government introduced the Veterans and Family Wellbeing Fund to support these organizations and all of the great work they do on the ground supporting Canadian veterans. In 2019, we proudly supported Helmets to Hard Hats through this fund to help veterans seeking careers in construction and maintenance. We are at this time in the process of reviewing the applications of the Wellbeing Fund and will be able to have more information in the very near future. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
We have a point of order. The Honourable Member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Speaker has reminded the House on numerous occasions that for those participating virtually to make sure their backdrops are nonpartisan and as neutral as possible. Unfortunately, as we witnessed today during question period, the member for Windsor-Tecumseh has seemed to have forgotten this. I'd kindly ask that you remind all members of the House to keep their backdrops neutral and nonpartisan. Thank you.
I appreciate the Honourable Member's point of order and information he provided. We will remind individuals, parliamentarians, to make sure that when they are participating virtually that their background should be neutral. to avoid any partisan messages, and that will help alleviate having these points of order and having to repeat the same message over and over again. I have a point of order from the honourable member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Yes, Madam Speaker, a point of order. You know, one of my roles, not only as a member of the opposition, but as the elected representative for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford, is to hold this government to account. I asked a very clear question on an issue that matters to my riding, and neither the parliamentary secretary or the Minister of Transport stood up. I demand an answer to my question, Madam Speaker.
I have another point of order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, there was an attempt. We were having some technical difficulties. If we could get the leave of the House, maybe the member could just repose his question, and we'd be more than happy to ensure that there's an answer.
I did allow for quite a bit of time to rectify the opportunity to answer. I will ask the House for unanimous consent to repose the question and to have the answer. Does the honourable member have unanimous consent to repose the question? Yes? Yes. Okay, the honourable member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I was saying, last year off the southern Gulf Islands, a large bulk carrier dragged its anchor and drifted 1,200 meters to hit another vessel. And we were very lucky that this time no major damage was done. Now, Transport Canada's own information has revealed there are 102 occurrences of ships dragging anchor in this area over 5 years, and that raises serious safety and environmental concerns. Residents and local First Nations are calling for an end to anchorages in these waters. Will the minister commit to working with us to end southern BC anchorages before an environmental disaster occurs?
The Honourable Minister.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente. Et je tiens to...
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to apologize to my opposition colleague. I had an internet issue, but I'm very pleased to answer. The government strategy aims to... I'm sorry, I have to interrupt the honourable member. I'm going to ask the honourable member to start over because there were some issues with the video. Please start over. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will try to answer my colleague's question. This government's long-term strategy has 3 major targets. First of all, to improve anchoring in public ports, improve supply chains, trustworthiness and reliability in the long term, and improve the social impacts. The new interim protocol for anchoring has been created in collaboration with the Vancouver Fraser Valley Port and other organizations. And the new protocol was set up to meet the immediate concerns of these coastal communities. I can assure my colleague that the well-being of coastal communities is a priority for our government.
And that brings an end to question period. Tabling of documents. Introduction of government bills. Déclaration de ministre. Rapport de délégation inter...
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Presenting reports from committees. The Honourable Member for Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present in both official languages the report of the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs entitled Main Estimates 2021-22, Vote 1 under Canadian High Arctic Research Station, Votes 1, 5, 10, and L5 under Department of Crown Indigenous Relations, and Votes 1, 5, and 10 under Department of Indigenous Services. Thank you.
Presenting reports from committees, the Honourable Member for Mississauga, Erin.